Thank you so much for the nice welcome. Thank you for showing up. It means a lot to me. I see some faces of folks who have trusted me to walk a few steps of your journey with you, and that means more to me than you could ever know. So thank you for that. Many years ago, I had the good fortune to hear the South African playwright Athol Fugard give a lecture on the theater, on its essence and its origins. In his view, the theater began when the first cave dwellers emerged from their cave, sat around the fire, and somebody said, "Hey, listen, this is what happened to me." Our stories, it would seem, can shape us, sustain us. They can define us to ourselves and one another. They most certainly offer us a pathway to connect to one another, to our families, to the larger circle of life. I have a dear friend, Polly, who's a brilliant woman. She's a professor of world cultures here at UCLA. And she was telling me about the Luba people of Central Africa, about whom she is an expert. The Luba will document their stories and histories through intricate beadwork, creating these elaborate artifacts known as lukasas, or sometimes stringing beads in an intentional way into a necklace. Now, the reading of those beads, the telling of the stories, the deciphering of their codes, depends upon who has the standing to do so, who has the authority to wear the necklace or to even restring the beads. And the meaning of those stories is fluid, changeable over time, depending not only upon the arrangement of the beads and who's doing the telling, but the time and place in which the story is told. Not so different, really, from the way we tell and recount our own stories using the language of words. Changeable over time, depending upon who's doing the telling and the time and place. Still, I'm struck by the creativity of this, the artistry involved in creating an object in the way that a word can never really be. Polly is also quick to draw a distinction between history and memory. History, she would say, has to do with documentation and interpretation, and memory, on the other hand, comes from far deeper places. It's fluid, spotty, sometimes even out of control. I am fascinated by that distinction. A few years ago, I was excited to get to see a screening of the National Theater's production of a play called The Audience, starring Helen Mirren. The play depicts a series of meetings between the Queen of England and any one of the dozen or so prime ministers who have served during her 60-plus year reign. Now, those meetings are historical fact. They do indeed take place every week like clockwork. Intensely private affairs, both parties agree not to breathe a word of what's spoken, not even to their spouses. As a part of the screening, there was an interview included with the playwright Peter Morgan, in which he was asked if the play is true or not. Well, he draws a distinction between fact and truth. Is the play factually accurate? No. Is it true? That's another story. He likes to think so. I think we're all old enough to realize that truth can be a slippery business. What's true for one is not necessarily true for the other. What was true for me at age 30 isn't true for me any longer. And does it really matter beyond whatever meaning I give it in today's world, in my life today? While our stories may sustain us, they can also haunt us. Either way, I find they provide the opportunity, maybe even the invitation, to make some spiritual sense of our lives. Deciding what it all means. How do our stories intersect with our beliefs, our understanding about any kind of larger truth or reality? Does God exist? Does life go on beyond this plane of existence? What's the meaning of my life now from this vantage point? Even though the clarified view that they offer might be as fleeting and changeable as the arrangement of beads on a necklace. Sometimes I think our stories just serve as a kind of guide to see us through a particularly challenging time. I have a patient, Norma, in her 70s with ovarian cancer. Michael, she said, I get a lot of strength from watching the movie of my own life that plays in my head. She draws her strength from the very challenges she herself has faced. By slight contrast, many years ago I worked for a hospice, and I had a patient, Harold, who was in his mid-80s and had suffered a quite debilitating stroke. Every week I visited Harold. Every week it was the same thing. He'd recount the same 5 or 6 stories, the same 5 or 6 events from his life over and over again in rapid-fire succession in this closed-loop kind of tape, reliving each moment as he told it. And then I met the most beautiful woman in the world, and we fell in love, and we were so happy, and we got married, and then she got sick, and she died, and the Germans, they were shooting at me, and they killed my buddy right in front of my face. And so it went for an hour, or for however long I would sit there. If I tried to interrupt Harold's loop and ask him a question, "Harold, how did you meet your wife anyway?" he got a little irritated, as if awakened from a trance. What was that? He'd answer me, but he'd go right back to the comfort of his chant. 80 plus years of life had all been refined and distilled down to 5 or 6 stories, 5 or 6 beads on his necklace. Who would we be without our stories? And as Pauli cautions us, I wonder how many of us confuse our own memories with history, thinking they're one and the same, that they are the whole truth, neatly tucked away into the past, fixed and unchanging forever. Or that likewise, the characters, the people that populate our very own biographies, even the lessons and the meaning we took from our own stories, are likewise fixed and unchanging, neatly tucked away. I think that life presents an ever-present opportunity, moment to moment, to reinterpret those beads, find new meaning, new readings, and that hanging on to the old bead can erect barriers to a deeper kind of maybe wisdom, deeper kind of peace, maybe even deeper healing. Albert is in his mid-50s and he knows he's dying from pancreatic cancer. He's had a very stormy relationship with his adult daughter, Denise. Seems Albert and Denise have very differing versions of the truth about just what kind of father Albert was. And it's important to him before he died that he come to some kind of peace with Denise. As a pathway to that healing, I gently made the suggestion of offering Denise a deep, heartfelt kind of listening to her version of the truth without any need to rebut, defend, contradict, explain. Could he hear her in such a way that he could hear just how it is that her story is true too? Albert understood right away the validity of what I was suggesting because he had experienced something similar himself with me. Albert is one who has plenty of folks in his world with whom to share, but no one to tell his deeper fears and regrets and anxieties without somebody wanting to put a hopeful spin on things and telling him to just stay strong and be positive. That's my role in a way, to offer that kind of listening. Could he hear Denise in such a way that he could put his reality aside and allow her reality to invade him? And might they discover a love and compassion that is deeper than either one's version of the truth? That love and compassion might be the only true thing. It might be the only genuine gemstone on a string full of ceramic beads. And the facts, the history, might just get in the way. As one who loves to collect objects from my travels as a way of remembering them, like those beads, I love the idea of imbuing an object with meaning. The object stays the same, but the meaning might change and evolve over time. Sometimes it can be tempting to confuse the object with the meaning itself. Lourdes was razor thin, wheelchair bound, in her 70s, rectal cancer, tenderly cared for by her son, Enrique. But on this particular day in the infusion clinic, she was very distressed and tearful. She told me the story of how decades earlier, when she left her native Puerto Rico, that her mother had given her a few pieces of jewelry to remember her by. Well, now Lourdes was also a bit of a pack rat. She kept all of her belongings in little bags strewn on the floor surrounding the recliner where she spent most of her waking hours. Earlier that week, in an attempt to tidy up, Enrique inadvertently threw out the bag with the jewelry in it. Lourdes was beside herself with grief and anger. I haven't been able to sleep all week. I haven't been able to eat. The nurse just told me I lost 5 pounds. If you saw her, you'd see she didn't have 5 pounds to lose. And I'm so angry at Enrique. Why is he such a control freak? How could he be so careless? I invited her to gently dip into the spiritual waters of forgiveness, which was not a good call on my part, I must admit. So then I invited a reflection on what was the real gift her mother gave her. Was it really a few pieces of jewelry, or was it her undying love and affection? And that's a gift that can't be lost or misplaced or thrown away. In a similar kind of way, it seemed Lourdes had the gift of precious little time left on the planet. Would she spend the gift of that time enjoying the love of her son, Enrique, or would she spend it stewing in her own anger? She might, and that would be her choice. I sometimes think the very last power we have is the power to assign meaning to our stories. Shelley's in her late 20s. She is smart, bright, perky, vivacious. She's got this wide-eyed curiosity about life and the world around her. She's also got a rare and aggressive lymphoma. Not quite certain what course her treatment will take or how much future she can realistically hope for or expect. Her parents took advantage of a very narrow window of time between treatments to whisk Shelley off on her first and quite possibly last trip to Paris. I was thrilled to get to see her in the infusion clinic when she got back. She was there with one of her best girlfriends. I asked the girlfriend why she loved Shelley so much. And she thought for a moment and said, well, here's an example. Who goes to Paris and when they come back, what does she want to show me but this cheap plastic throwaway bag from some shop? She doesn't want to show me what she bought, what went in the bag. She wants to show me the bag itself. Because the bag reminds her of this particular afternoon shopping with her parents and the smells in the shop and the way the sunlight looked on the buildings across the street from the shop and the sounds of the street musician wafting inside the shop from the sidewalk. That bag was a container not for an object, not for a history, but for a memory. I have my own story about a container that likewise serves as a kind of talisman, opening the door to deeper levels of meaning, resonance, love, maybe even magic, that in the end have nothing to do with the container itself. September 1962, I was about to begin the 3rd grade at Signal Hill School in Long Beach. I needed a brand new lunchbox and thermos to start off the school year just right. Although why we ever bothered with those thermoses, I don't know, because they always broke by the 2nd week of school. You drop the lunchbox once and the thermos is a goner. Well, the fashionable lunchbox of choice that year for little boys was one that was covered in images of nuclear-powered submarines. After all, this is the height of the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, all of that. The thermos, I remember, had photographic images of sailors peering through the periscope as if the cylindrical thermos were the periscope. I simply had to have that lunchbox. Not because I loved submarines so much, or was even remotely interested, but because of internalized homophobia. I didn't know what gay or homosexual was, or that there was anybody else like me. I just knew I was different from other little boys. I knew I was a sissy, and I also knew I thought those sailors on the side of that thermos were kind of cute. That lunchbox would be my insurance policy, proof that I was indeed like the other little boys because my lunchbox says so. Well, my mom, bless her heart, drove me all over Long Beach looking for that damn lunchbox. We must have hit every supermarket and drugstore within a 10-mile radius. No luck. So I brown bagged it for the first few weeks of school, and Mom said she'd go out shopping again when she had a chance. So I come home from school one afternoon, and Mom said she'd been out shopping and still had no luck with the submarine, so she picked out something else for me. Uh-oh. Left to her own devices, she picked out Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color lunchbox with a big old image of Ludwig von Friggin Drake on it. Ludwig was Donald Duck's eccentric uncle, a mad scientist, a professor. There he is riding the Matterhorn. My heart just sank. I sure didn't want to hurt my mom's feelings, but geez, Mom, why not just send me to school in a little cocktail dress and high heels? You can be sure I lost that lunchbox in pretty short order. I don't know what happened to it, Mom. Maybe somebody took it on the school bus. Well, 39 years later, September again, 2001, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. There's that awful, agonizing wait for biopsy results and to stage the tumor and plan a course of treatment, all the while playing out every possible scenario in our minds. I took a couple days off of work to go spend some time with her while we all endured the wait. She lives up on the Central Coast near Morro Bay. Just to get her out of the house, took her out to lunch, and we drove up the coast to the next town north of Morro Bay, Cayucas. Among my fondest childhood memories of time with my mom were just such outings, just she and I going out to lunch, doing a little shopping. In Cayucas, there's one of these mini antique malls, maybe a dozen or so antique and collectible vendors stuffed into this musty old storefront. We went in to poke around just to kill time. Both of us are really walking around in a daze. I'd hear my mom cry out, "Oh, honey, come look. My grandmother had a sugar bowl just like this one." All these little touchstones to the past, little beads on her necklace. I made my way up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs was a vendor who specialized in vintage lunchboxes. And what do you know, there on the top shelf was my submarine lunchbox. And get this, it had my name painted on it, Mike. You cannot imagine my astonishment. I called out to my mom, "Mom, come up here, you're never gonna believe this." She had long forgotten the lunchbox story, so I told her, and we had a big belly laugh over that. And then she said, well, you're going to buy it, aren't you? Mom, it's $50. What am I going to do with a rusty old lunchbox? I sure have better things to do with $50 than that. Maybe it's enough to know that we found it at last and that it's here. Well, when I got home, drove back home, and I told my husband, Scott, about our magical find, he was so upset with me for not buying the lunchbox. Scott always only wants what's best for me. Always. So he took it upon himself to call our good friend Gail, who knows everything about antiques and collectibles, and Gail got on the phone, made a few calls, found that vendor in Cayucas, and they bought me the lunchbox and had it sent home as a surprise. I don't know if you can see, but it says my name, Mike, right there. There isn't a container big enough for the layers of love and meaning, acceptance, magic, really, in that story. Make of it what you will. The object stays the same, but the meaning changes over time. Sometimes I think we get so attached to the reading we might make from one particular bead on our necklace that we base the reading of all subsequent beads, all of our choices and decisions on that one bead, only to discover the pain of having to reinterpret that bead because life demands it. My grandmother Barbara, my dad's mom, was one tough cookie, fiercely strong, independent, hard-working, no nonsense. Her standard reply to the greeting, "How are you?" was, "I'm just as mean as usual." She lived well into her 90s and would say she had no regrets and had never been wrong about anything, not even once. And she meant it. A couple years before she died, she had a pretty bad stroke that robbed her of the ability to drive and to go to work every day, as she always had at the family business, the Long Beach Bakery. Well, this presented quite a spiritual crisis for my grandmother. "Sonny," she said, "I discovered years ago the meaning of life. The purpose of life is to produce, that's it. But now I can't produce anything, so I don't understand why God's keeping me alive. Why can't I just die?" Maybe you got it wrong, Graham. Maybe that wasn't it after all. That would have been too painful to consider. That would have meant her whole life had been built on an erroneous conclusion. Pali teaches us that for the Luba people, the reading of the stories has to do with who has the standing to do so, who has the authority to do so. Who has the standing to tell our own stories, to own them, if you will? Do we alone own them, or do we sometimes give that power away to the opinion interpretation of others, or even to the values of the larger culture? As one who looks almost daily at the theme of success in life, both in my own life and certainly in the lives of the patients I walk beside, that is one challenging bead to interpret, unencumbered by the values of the larger culture we've all been force-fed about what success looks like. What about ideas about health, healing, wellness? Are we limited to the ideas that we hear from the medical establishment or images that we see on magazine covers? Do you suppose it's possible to inhabit a dying, cancer-ridden body and still claim a sense of wellness, even of healing? I believe so because I've seen it. But what about the reverse? Anna, a beautiful young woman, 30 years old, was cured of Hodgkin's lymphoma. Go, live your life, be well, put this behind you. And yet she was paralyzed, immobilized with fear and grief, grieving so terribly the lost innocence of a limitless future. She now knew in no uncertain terms that any good thing can be snatched away in the blink of an eye. What's more, she felt like damaged goods. No man will ever love me now. Well, her reading of that cancer bead would be very different from how her oncologist would read that very same bead. In a sadly ironic way, Janet told me how she had first read her cancer bead when she was diagnosed the first time 20 years ago in her 40s. To tell you the truth, Michael, my life wasn't so red hot. I was okay with going, really. I made plans, I was at peace with it, let's do it. And then I didn't die. Cancer went into complete remission. And now, 20 years later, they tell me it's back. stage 4. And at first I thought, well, okay, I know my way around here. I've done this before. But the thing is, now I'm stuck, because now I've learned how to live, and I'm not ready to leave the party. From what I observe, attaching ourselves to any particular meaning can really trip us up. It can intensify our suffering. I would suggest it can even stunt our spiritual growth, particularly when we add faith to the mix. Doug was a great guy, mid-50s, passionate student of life, ardent spiritual explorer. You might describe him best as sort of New Age. For Doug, his core spiritual value was that of forgiveness. Everything came down to that for him. So when he was first diagnosed with cancer, he was convinced he got cancer because he'd never really forgiven his ex-wife, Tracy. They met when they were quite young, got married, and divorced not long afterward. And though they'd been divorced for many years, he confessed, I've never really forgiven her for her betrayal of me. So this became his spiritual quest, forgiving Tracy. His cancer depended on it. So he's reading books and doing exercises until the ultimate forgiveness test. Michael, I'm going to call Tracy, and I'm going to tell her from the deepest, most sincere place in my heart, I forgive you. Well, I guess Tracy didn't realize she'd been in trouble all these years. She had moved on and was living a different story. But she did tell him she was glad he had found some peace, and she wished him well. But when his oncologist told him that his recent scans revealed that his cancer was in complete remission, well, he had all the proof he needed. It was because of forgiveness. He would tell anyone who would listen, with the passion of a zealot. That is, until the cancer came back. It can be a dangerous and cruel business, I think, attaching ourselves to any particular meaning and seeing it as fixed. In the early 90s, there was another big economic recession and downturn that hit Los Angeles, and I was a self-employed designer at the time, and my business fell off to zero. I had to do something quick. As a stopgap survival strategy, I took the CBEST test, I got an emergency teaching credential, and I was hired to be a substitute school teacher for Inglewood City Schools. This is a couple weeks after the Rodney King uprisings in LA. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Soon enough, I discovered I did not have the constitution to face those schools every day. So on my off days, I volunteered at Project Angel Food, delivering home-cooked meals to homebound people with AIDS. And I got involved with this fledgling volunteer AIDS hospice group called Project Nightlight. But at the time, I felt like the loser of the world. No one could convince me otherwise. I assiduously avoided friends who might dare to ask the unthinkable question, so what are you doing these days? What's more, I was convinced God had dispensed all the components necessary to live a successful life to everyone else except me. Firmly attached to that idea. And yet when I look back on that point in time now, I see it as the pivot point that made this part of my life possible in this career of chaplaincy that I love so much, though it took so many years to materialize. So am I to look back on that time now and call it a blessing? Hurting so bad that I wanted to die? Success and failure, it can be hard to tell which is which sometimes. Sometimes I think we get so myopic, so lost in our story, that we are blinded to the patterns that might be unfolding, maybe even across the generations. Paul was a tender-hearted, sweet guy, late 50s, early 60s, esophageal cancer. He was telling me how much he adored his dad, whom he had just nursed through his death from cancer less than a year earlier. I asked him why he adored his dad so much, and he looked a little befuddled. I never really thought about it. I just always adored my dad. He wasn't around that much when I think about it. He was in the Merchant Marine. You see, Michael, my mom died when I was 11. My sister and I, we went to live with our grandparents. And when I think about it, those were the best years of my childhood, maybe even of my life. Turns out, Paul's adult daughter, her 2 kids, have had to move in with him and his wife. I never realized those kids are the same age my sister and I were when we went to live with our grandparents. His eyes sparkled through his tears when he said, gee, I sure hope those kids look back on this as one of the best times of their lives. I want to make sure that happens. Sometimes we just need to take a step back and get a larger perspective, see with new eyes. Or maybe sometimes we just need to go back to an old story and revisit it. reinterpret an old bead that we might have been holding or wearing for decades without ever really thinking about it. A career or so before the design thing, I was a professional dancer. 1975, the Broadway musical, The Chorus Line, opened in New York City. I had never, ever wanted anything so badly as to be a part of that production. And that's without even having seen it. That's just listening to the cast album over and over again in my teeny little apartment. Hey, those are my stories too, and I want to be a part of the telling. So January 1976, Michael Bennett, the director, creator, choreographer of the piece, came out to LA to hold open auditions for an LA company and for national tours. Went on for 2 days. It was held at the old Aquarius Theater on Sunset. Every dancer in Los Angeles was there. Everyone who thought they were a dancer was there. Though I was broke, I went out and bought new dance clothes just for the audition. Hey, this is my chance, right? Well, I sang, and I danced, and I sang, and I danced, and I danced, and I sang, and I survived cut after cut after cut until toward the end of the second day, with maybe a dozen or two guys left on the line, Michael Bennett said, okay, guys, we're going to hand out scripts now and ask you to read for parts. Oh, my God. This might really happen. But just a minute. Michael and Jim, would you step forward, please? And with that, his co-choreographer, Bob Avian, jumps up on the stage, comes over to me and says, Michael, you're a talented guy. You sing and dance beautifully. I'm sorry, there's just not a part for you in the show. Thanks for coming. I couldn't breathe. It was as if I had been kicked in the gut. What, you didn't know that yesterday? I sucked up my tears, I scrambled to get my bag, and I darted out the stage door into the alley before I lost it completely. Jim was a few feet in front of me and in just as bad a shape. Just then, Charlene, who had been assisting Michael with the audition and with whom I had worked on a few TV specials, she comes racing out the stage door and she runs up to Jim, puts her arm around him to comfort him, and I overheard her offer him another job right there on the spot for an upcoming TV special. Hey, what about me? That memory is still so vivid. Fast forward 40 years. Every Saturday, I take a dance class for former professional dancers of, shall we say, a certain age. I call it my old farts dance class. It is heaven on a stick. It is church. It connects me to this very sacred, essential part of my spirit. It's taught by Walter Painter, a choreographer who gave me my very first professional dance job in 1973 at Sacramento Music Circus. He's assisted sometimes by his wife, Charlene, the one and same from the alley behind the Aquarius Theater in 1976. I love Charlene to pieces. It's never occurred to me to tell her my memory of that day. What's the point? It's ancient history. Well, a few summers ago, I got a terrible summer cold. I was up all night coughing so violently that I ruptured a vocal cord and I bled. I couldn't utter a sound, even if I wanted to. I think my husband, Scott, was kind of happy about that, actually. The cold got better, but I still had no voice, so I went to dance class. And it just so happens that the national company of the Broadway revival of A Chorus Line was in town, playing at the Pantages Theater. Now, some of the gals in my class had been in that original company. One had even starred in the London production. So I get to class a little early. The women are sitting there chatting and stretching, and we're all waiting for the ballet class to wrap it up in the studio before us. And one of the women shares that she had been to the Pantages Theater the night before to see the show. And so she's offering her review and her critique, and then she's sharing her reminiscences of her time on the line, and then the others are chiming in. Oh yeah, I remember when Michael Bennett called me and asked me to go to London. And inside I'm just dying. And I can't talk. I can only listen. But it was as if a 40-year-old scab had been ripped right off. And just then Charlene chimes in with, oh yeah, I remember when Michael was here, he called me and asked me to help him with the audition out here in LA. And I told him, but Michael, I haven't even seen the show yet. And he said, Charlene, the audition is the show. You're telling me. But inside, I so desperately wanted to talk, and I couldn't. Not to beat Charlene up, but to claim my own story, to give voice to it, to be visible, to say, I too was there that day. This is what I remember. And in an instant, I had this awakening to the perfection that I would just as soon call divine of this moment, that I couldn't talk, that I could only listen. Because you know what? It's my story. It's not anybody else's story. It's certainly not Charlene's story. Charlene, in a way, doesn't really have anything to do with it. While it might be a significant point on my biography, it's not even a blip on hers. It only matters to the degree I've assigned it meaning on my journey. And what if in the end it doesn't mean anything at all? Yeah, we might all use our stories to maybe fascinate us or inspire us, explain us to ourselves or each other, or in this case, perhaps to anchor me into a deep place of humility and compassion for perhaps wounds that never really heal. But it would be our folly, I think, to attach ourselves to that meaning and see it as unchanging forever. You see, sometimes when the gods are smiling and we keep our eyes and hearts open, our stories can circle back on themselves and offer us a kind of release or liberation, maybe even redemption, all from our willingness just to go back to the story one more time. 1984, the year I turned 30. Fueled by my spiritual convictions at the time and my understanding of the truth that I first needed to create the space in order to have the kind of success I wanted, I decided to quit my nice steady job at a small design firm in order to set the stage, to have my own success with my own business. I would live off my savings and then credit cards until the universe saw fit to fill my well-appointed stage with clients. Or so the thinking went. Things didn't go exactly according to plan. While I eventually made a go of it and had a nice successful business for many years, those first few years were rough. I do not exaggerate to say they rocked me to my very core. That first year, 1984, I didn't have enough money to buy my family Christmas presents, and it occurred to me, as both my grandmothers were getting on, one was 89 and one was 79, that I might interview them both about their lives and record the interviews on audio cassettes. We didn't have camcorders then, and I'd give out copies of those cassettes as my Christmas gift. Do I need to tell you how embarrassed I was to offer such a humble gift? I mean, I knew it was a sweet, meaningful gesture, but I was also acutely aware that such a gift did not speak to the kind of success I had certainly hoped for and expected by age 30. It seems so nutty now. I was pretty exhaustive in my questioning of both of them, asking them not only about their lives, but about their feelings and fears about what's to come. And this is decades before being a chaplain's even on the radar screen. As one had been born in 1895 and the other in 1905, both had lived through astonishing chapters of human history, technological advancement. I asked each of them, what invention, what event has made the greatest impact on you? And of course, I had my preconception of what their answer would be. Seeing a man walk on the moon, flying in an airplane for the first time, being able to talk on a telephone, being able to vote as a woman. How delicious to have your assumptions thrown back in your face. My grandma Ann, my mom's mom, without thinking at all, said Social Security. They didn't have it when I was younger, and I wouldn't be able to make it without it. My grandma Barbara, the tough cookie, without spending any time at all reflecting, said glazed donuts. She lived very nearly through the entire 20th century. Glazed donuts. Your grandfather came up with a recipe to make them with potato flour when wheat flour was rationed. It saved our business. It meant we could eat. Pretty darn concrete, practical answers. Hard scrabble lives, both of them. Those tapes have been tucked away in a shoebox somewhere for 30 years. My mom is now 87 years old, very aware that the end is waiting nearby. A couple years ago, I went up to see her for the weekend, and I happened to have a speaking engagement that Sunday at the Unitarian Church in San Luis Obispo. After church, my mom, my sister, and I went out to lunch, and then we're driving back to my sister's house, and my mom was sharing with us that she felt like there was this black spot on her heart with respect to her mother, all stemming from a comment my grandmother had made to her not long before she died. A comment that was so painful for my mom to hear, it made her question whether her mom ever loved her. No matter how my mom would turn it over in her head, she couldn't let it go. I hadn't thought about those tapes in years, and suddenly I thought, Mom's got to hear that tape, and she's got to hear it soon. And all of a sudden I'm obsessed about when can I get back up here? Where's my copy of the tape? How am I going to play it for her? When we get here, we don't have tape players anymore. I get to my sister's house, and lo and behold, she finds her copy of the cassette. She also happens to have a dusty old boombox out in the garage. So we dust off the boombox, bring it into the living room, plug it in, and sit down, the three of us staring at it as if it were a campfire. Just to hear my grandmother's voice for the first time in the 25 years since she died elicited this full body kind of sigh and tears, of course. It was truly heart-opening, awe-inspiring to hear my long-deceased grandmother unwittingly have a conversation with her own daughter, now as a peer. My mom's actually older than my grandma was when we made the tape. I think there was profound healing for each of us on different layers and in different dimensions, all from our willingness just to go back to the story. At first, my mom was offering this argumentative commentary as she listened. Oh, she's so wrong about that. We lived on Thrasher for 3 years, and then we moved to Chicago. All hung up on the facts, the history, not the memory. The truth, on the other hand, would be slower to reveal itself, and it would have nothing to do with the facts or the history. As the interview was winding down, I asked my grandma if she was afraid to die. Yes, I am, she said. I figure they're just going to put me in a hole in the ground and that's it, no more grandma. Pretty soon, nobody's going to remember grandma anymore. She would talk about herself in third person like that when she was feeling particularly vulnerable. Do you think it goes on, Gram, after we leave? Is there more? No, she said, I don't. Betraying every fiber of her Italian Catholic upbringing. What do you think, honey? She asked. Through my tears, I choked it out. Well, Gram, I think we will meet again. And I think you will come to understand why your life has had to be so hard. Well, good. I'm glad to hear you believe that, honey. You keep on believing that because whatever's in your heart, that's the only thing that's true. Suddenly, my little Italian grandma with maybe a third-grade education sounded like a Buddhist master. And through all the tears and sniffling on the tape, you can also hear the clinking of dishes and silverware and comments like, did you get enough to eat, honey? Was that warm enough for you? You want some potato salad to go with that? There's plenty of truth right there. My mom was so shocked by all of this. I never heard this before. I never knew she felt that way. How come I didn't know this? It was as if she could hear her mother for the first time as herself. In many ways, for my mom, it was like looking in a mirror. But what's more, she said, it's like a miracle. The spot on my heart is just gone. And I feel free to love my mom again, as I always have, ever since I was a little girl. Gee, maybe it wasn't such a bad Christmas gift after all, huh? The thing is, it sounded like a love that was so much broader and deeper than one that could be narrowly defined between a mother and a daughter. Yes, our stories are powerful. They're illuminating. They anchor us into reality like nothing else. They even have the power to reveal the very essence of love itself. But the craziest irony of all, to me, I think, is that it is a love that might indeed be storyless. It might be the only true thing. A few years ago, I attended my 40th high school reunion. Wilson High School, Long Beach, class of 1972. There aren't too many settings that are more ripe for the telling of stories than a high school reunion. And I found if we keep our heads on straight, keep our hearts open, our eyes open, it can be a great opportunity to reread those formative beads, loosen our grip on them. I've attended each reunion in 10-year increments. Each one seems to have its own flavor and personality. At the 10-year, it seems everybody wants to show off and prove how successful they become. By this stage in life, most have been humbled by life and loss a bit. I always experience them as this compressed time warp. I'm 14 and I'm 57 in the same moment, and I see everybody else through the same lens. I'm looking right past all the wrinkles and the extra pounds and the missing hair. I still see the handsome football player and the perky cheerleader and the bully and that one who made me laugh so hard in 9th grade English. Of course, everybody's memory doesn't serve them quite so well. I remember Randy Tischauer came up to me and said, yeah, Mike, I remember you always walking around in your Letterman's jacket. No, Randy, that would not have been me. Just then, Gary Wilson chimed in, who'd known me since 3rd grade and knew me for the sissy that I was. "Oh, trust me on this, Randy. Mike never would have had a letter in anything." Gee, thanks, Gary. I was Mike then. The highlight of my evening came late. I was desperately looking for an empty table to just sit down and catch my breath from all this overwhelming nostalgia. And I wasn't seated but a few moments, and up walks Cheryl Young. "Hi, Mike. Remember me?" I did remember Cheryl. I remembered her since middle school, junior high, though I'm certain we never had a class together, and I can't recall even having a single conversation with her. But I knew who she was. She had this short mop of curly hair and this wide silk scarf tied around her head. And she had the sweetest smile. And she spoke with a kind of simplicity that made me think a little something else is going on here. "Well, sure, I remember you, Cheryl. Have a seat. How are you? How's life?" "Well, I've had some health problems," she said. "Earlier, I had thyroid cancer, and this year I had an AVM. Do you know what that is?" I said, "Yes, I do. It's an arterial venous malformation. I used to work on the neuro floor." With that, she pulled back her wig to reveal a very nasty scar across her skull. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Cheryl." And I asked to hear a bit more about her journey. And in another one of those moments that felt like a divine instant, I had this awakening that I have no need whatsoever to hear even a bit more of her story. What's more, I don't have any need to share even a word of mine. It just doesn't matter. What I felt was an urgent need to say, "Cheryl, I am so glad you're here." Meaning at the reunion, of course, but in a much deeper way here in life. "Can I give you a hug?" "Oh, yes, please," she said. And when I hugged her, I had this overwhelming sensation that if there is such a place as heaven, this must be what it's like. Our stories just don't matter anymore. They just melt away. They're only the circuitous path that brings us up to this point in time. We can meet, and we can hug, and we can say, "I'm glad you're here." 3 years ago, Glenn, a most beloved member of my family, my mom's partner for the previous 15 years, the love of her life that she waited 70 years to find, took his own life. Approaching 90, failing health, resolute he would not die in a nursing home or hospital, and he would not be a burden to anyone else, he chose to write the ending to his own story. He left my mom a note on a corner scrap of yellow-lined paper. 3 words: "I love you." He left the note on the unfinished jigsaw puzzle he'd been working on the night before. Nearly 90 years of life, and it all came down to 3 words on a corner scrap of yellow paper. That is one bead that I think we just want to understand. We spend our whole lives trying to understand it. The weight of it, the textures, the facets, the colors. It's so precious, we don't want to lose that one. We want more. We might spend our whole lives stringing and restringing our beads, trying to make sense of it all, and in the end, it might all come down to that one bead. Yeah, our stories are powerful, and maybe they're everything, in fact, that make us who we are. And maybe they're just stories. As for myself, I'll just say, I am glad you're here. Thank you.
Sitting here is enough.
Don't forgive me for... Oh, that's right. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Anybody got any reflections or thoughts about all that? But you remind me, I don't know if you heard the comment about the distillation of life in these stories, and if we could just do that all the time, and yeah, wouldn't that be great, and not get pissed off about bashing my car or something like that. But one of my favorite plays of all time, I'm sure most of you have seen it or read it, is Our Town, written by Thornton Wilder in the 30s. And there's 3 acts, and it's a prototypical New England town at the turn of the last century. And first act is love, second act marriage, third act is death. And Emily Gibbs dies in childbirth, and in the third act, she's up at the cemetery with all the others who have preceded her in death, and everybody's just sitting in chairs like this, just waiting. And there's a character called the stage manager who sort of acts like a cosmic master of ceremonies, and he offers her the option of going back and visiting one day from her life. Everybody in the cemetery says, don't do it. And she can't resist. And he says, pick an ordinary day, and I think she says, my 12th birthday. And she's going and visiting everything, and she's so overwhelmed by everything, and it's not the big stuff. It's Mr. Morgan's drugstore before he painted it. It's the old fence that used to be around our yard. I can't look at everything hard enough. And soon enough, she begs the stage manager to take her back. She just can't stand it. And she asks him, does anybody ever really get it, every moment, while they're living it? No, he says. Oh, a few poets and saints maybe, but no. And I think it's tempting to think we should be able to. I should be able to get it every moment, particularly given the work that I'm privileged to do. I should really never get pissed off about my pants are too tight, or I got a spot on them, or I bashed my car, but I do. And maybe there's something deeper in that, to offer ourselves grace to be however we are in this moment, and that's human too. I see it with patients every day. I know I shouldn't care about that, but damn it, I do. And I should be grateful that I have this amount of time, but I'm not, and I'm pissed, and it's loss, 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 loss. Can we just give ourselves grace to, I'm doing my best, and we're living in all these multiple realities at the same time. Yeah.
So, Michael, you have me thinking about something that I've never thought about this way. When my first husband died, it was about 26, 27 years ago, he was a great storyteller about his life, about his family, about the people in his life. And when he died, I went through a fairly long period when we had 2 children that I hadn't written all these stories down. It's like, what was going to happen to these stories? And I mean, part of my profound grief was that I had these stories were going to be lost. And listening to you, I mean, I'm realizing how long ago that was, and how those stories, like that urgency about the details of the story, are nothing now, because those stories become, it's sort of like a woven candle. I mean, that all of our stories weave together now. His stories, my children's stories, and that ultimately, what matters for me, that I'm sort of taking away from this, is the continuity of that, and not staying married, exactly as you said, that the details of the story don't matter, the meaning of the life matters, and the stories are just vehicles for that, and transform and change as we understand them differently, and as new parts of our lives impact that. And I want to thank you for that, because I never knew where to put those feelings. Where to put those feelings of loss.
Thank you for sharing. You share a lot in that, and it is conflicted. The stories, the details do matter. I'm approaching an age where I got to think, who's going to go through all my shit when I die? And nobody's going to care. Does it matter? But I got that in India. Somebody's going to like it. I don't want, it's going to be some garage sale somewhere. Does it matter? It matters to me now. Not long ago, one of my patients died. And when I went to see her a day or so before she died, trying to reminisce with her and her husband about their lives, and tell me again how you met. Tell me again about the wedding day. And the husband was reminiscing, and she was just saying, I don't remember. I don't remember. The memory was already going. And he was getting frustrated, not kind of picking up on the cues and saying, oh, you remember? No, stop talking. Well, maybe you want to go to sleep then, honey. No, I don't want to sleep. I want you both here. Just don't talk. And it was one of the most sacred moments in my life. That's all there is. We don't have anything to say that's so damn important. Hold the space. Love this moment. All we got. We think it's about everything else. Money, get a raise, go on vacation. We don't even have a story anymore. We can't live like that. I'd like to, but I want to have an awareness that that's there too. Just this moment, just you, just us right now. That's all we got. Yes, Father Tom.
Michael, you refer to yourself as a sissy?
Yeah.
To me, you're no sissy at all.
Well, thank you.
My question is this, how did your mom react to her partner's suicide?
Powerful question. I thought it would have killed her. I didn't expect her to live that long. And it's been 3 years, and she's had a hard go of it. She was proud of him. She was actually proud of him. She did not hang out in anger. He had always said, if it ever gets to that, I'm walking off the end of a pier. I mean, he was always real clear, and he had a very clear kind of life plan and strategy that I wish I had. I mean, real simple folk stuff. Can you do anything about it? No. Why worry about it? I mean, it just, okay. She admired that. She hated being alone, but she didn't blame him one bit because she knew how hard it was for him. And I think, if anything, felt so grateful that he hung out a lot longer than he probably would have because of her. Thanks for asking that, though. Anybody else? Yes, Ray.
How have you been grappling since Sunday?
Oh, goodness, how have I been grappling with Sunday? That is so layered and complex, and I just resist where everybody tends to go with it, myself included. If we didn't have homophobia, if we didn't have Islamophobia, if we had gun control, if we had less tolerance for violence, this wouldn't have happened. And then there's people on the right side of the government, meaning the conservative side, who said, oh, it wasn't, just denying that it was an LGBT hate crime. It was just a crime against all of us, the governor of Florida. It's just a crime against us. No, it was against, yes, about all of us, but it's also about LGBT people. And I'm just still, my head's swimming with it. And I resist the idea to say, of course, I believe there should be no guns, period. That doesn't matter what I think. And guns are the problem, homophobia is the problem, Islamophobia is the problem. Internalized homophobia seems like it's now the problem if the guy was struggling. Spiritually, I don't want to rush to the place where I need to point a finger. My therapist used to say, every time you point a finger, there's 3 pointed back at you. So where is it in the culture? Where do we need to heal? We need to heal in all of those dimensions and resist the need to simplify, I think, what the solution is. But that doesn't mean be complacent and turn away from it, but it means keep remembering that's a human being too. I don't know if any of you read Annie Lamott's books and things, but I get posts from her online, and she says, it kills me that God loves Dick Cheney as much as he loves me. But it's something to think about. Either we all are one or we are not. It's debatable. Of course, it's all debatable. But we are all one. And if I can't see myself in that man in some way, then I don't stand any chance of healing, or be willing to hear where was his pain coming from. And unless we're willing to address that, it's just going to keep back and forth. That's just one dumb guy's opinion. I am interested for anybody, what this sparked for anybody, if you're willing to share in your own cancer journey about stories and going back to old stories and maybe finding new meaning in old stories, or maybe not. I just want to forget it all. Yes?
I'd like you to say a little more about a phrase that you used, or that I heard anyway, about sacred presence and sacred moments in time.
Sacred presence and sacred what?
And sacred moments. In time.
Boy, I don't have much more to say other than, I don't know. I know it when I see it. It's kind of like whoever that judge was about obscenity. You know, when I'm so fully present in a moment and I get the magic as it's happening. There's lots of times when we look back on life and say, oh, wasn't that wonderful? That was the best trip ever. But yet if you were there at that time, God damn it, where's my ticket? And I don't have, blah, 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 blah. I wasn't in the moment. I look back on it and say, wasn't that sweet and wonderful? But there are times when I get it in this moment. And I did when I realized I can't talk. That felt like a gift from God, that I couldn't talk that moment. Wow, I'm going to get it in my bones. This is my story. Nobody else's. And the same when I was with the patient, that it was just like, this is uncomfortable as hell. I want to say something, I want to do something, but there's nothing to do. Just going to be here right now. And when you can breathe into that, okay, just had a moment. Yes?
So you asked about how it affected our sense
Yes.
of cancer journey. And how it affected my own sense is just some realization that the journey is the story. You know, the saying, we don't remember days, we remember moments. That there really are a series of moments, and I think it fits what you're saying about just string those together in different ways in response to the question about the cancer journey. But there really is no cancer journey. There really is just a series of moments that we recall.
Oh, do I love that. Did everybody hear that? Yeah. We want to organize it, put it in this file folder called The Cancer Journey, but it's really just one moment after another that gets woven together. I love that. I don't think Scott would be upset if I share with him that we have a ritual. I'm share it because I think it's a good idea for anybody here who's in a couple. Every anniversary, we each write down our 5 most memorable moments from the year. And it doesn't mean, oh, the great time on this trip. It can be this fight we had, or the way you looked at me after dinner that time, or the way you whatever. And we write them down, we read them to each other, we keep them in a book. And we got 20-some years of those now when we started doing this at our 20th anniversary. And to look at the volume of the book, just hold it without even reading, it's like, oh my God. And it's all what you say, it's just moment, 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 moment. Sweet, hard, painful, all of it. And it's just what you say. And I believe there's wisdom there in finding something sacred. I can't say it any more than that. Well, any last thoughts? I cannot thank you enough for showing up and listening. I really appreciate it. Go have a cookie.
Thank you.